Please like and subscribe to my channel. Chapter 5. Bond. I sprawled on my bunk contemplating the future. If the Krathen arrived as we hoped, would they embrace me or condemn me as the military had their people? If they did accept me, how would I integrate into a society so unlike my own? Shazy and I had come to rely on each other, accepting each other mostly out of necessity. She depended on my help to escape, and now I depended on her because I had nothing to return to. I dimmed the lights and closed my eyes. Did I want to go back? I asked myself. I found myself drawn to her more and more as the days marched on. I could perceive her scent even now. My eyes flew open as I realized the reason I could detect her scent was because she had entered my room. I dared not stir, fearing I would drive her away again. I yearned for her to stay, but trepidation caught my breath. Shazy slipped into the bunk beside me wordlessly and only gazed at me openly. I rolled onto my side facing her and shifted back to afford her more room. Shazy edged closer without diverting her eyes from me. I extended a tentative hand to stroke the side of her face. She pressed her cheek against my hand and purred ever so softly. Emboldened by her response, I drew her in close. I didn't force the encounter, however. I wished for her to not move at whatever pace was comfortable for her. The night was spent cradled against each other, neither wishing to shatter the moment. I woke the next morning with Shazy's head resting on my chest and her tail curled around my leg possessively as she breathed against me. Everywhere her body met mine felt electrified, like static. I reached up and began absently stroking the fur between her ears. It felt like silk between my fingers. Like all great moments, it was fleeting. Shazy rolled away to sit up on the side of the bed with her back turned. She sat there for a while as though waiting for something. Maybe for me to speak. Maybe for me to act. I was still gripped by my feelings. A part of me screamed that this wasn't right. The other prayed it was. I reached out just as she stood to depart. Her unclothed fur rustled in the ship's atmospheric system as she began to walk away, but halted in the doorway, turned, smiled, and left. I lay staring at the empty doorway that had contained her moments before. I released an exasperated sigh and rolled back. I found Shazy in the dining hall, sipping a broth similar to tea but with a meaty aftertaste. She looked up at me as I entered. "How's sleep?" she asked teasingly. I paused unexpectedly for only a second before retrieving a glass of water from the dispenser. I nearly leaped out of my skin with an undignified yelp, the instant I felt an errant claw trace a line down my back. I spun to face her, my excitement evident in the way my body shook. She took my right arm and ran her claws up my bicep before I felt a metallic ring snap closed. Shazy leaned in close, her lips brushing my ear. "I mark you," she whispered. She stepped back as she handed me a matching ring. They were fashioned from what appeared to be gold, with intricate swirling symbols reminiscent of Celtic runes. Shazy held out her right arm invitingly. "You do not have to accept," she whispered. "They represent a mating bond among my species." I didn't await further explanation. I carefully wrapped it around her arm, just above the bicep. It closed with an audible mechanical snap. "I mark you," I repeated. Shazy gripped both sides of my head and touched her forehead to mine. "We have work to do," she announced as she gently pushed my head back and strode away briskly. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't being flung around the cargo bay like a captured mouse being toyed with. Shazy stood over me as I sat on the floor, gasping breathlessly. "You must learn to fight. Krathen respect prowess above all else," she instructed. She extended a clawed hand to help me off the floor. She turned her back the moment I was on my feet. In that moment, I chose to employ the only tactic I knew to breach her defenses. I cheated. I reached out to snatch her tail, only to find myself flat on my back, with Shazy perched on my chest. "I hear you," she teased at the same time she gently boxed my ears. "You must learn to utilize all your senses." Shazy sat down on one of the many crates lining the bulkhead. "Our entire body speaks for us, unlike yours. Our ears and tail betray us most. When our ears lie flat and to the side while our tail twitches, it conveys a warning." She demonstrated. "We do not smile like your people. Showing teeth is a threat to my people." "A smile isn't always genuine for humans either," I countered. "We aren't so different." A smile along with a stiff posture or one that doesn't involve the eyes can signify danger. I crossed my arms over my chest. Crossed arms signals a defensive posture. We spent the better part of the remaining afternoon comparing postures and meanings. The more we began to understand each other, the more I began to discern all the signs I had been missing over the past weeks. I finally grasped the missing clues about her feelings toward me. I began noticing how seemingly casual contact had been more invitation than happenstance. The evenings unfolded in exploration of each other. I traced the contours of her toned muscles beneath the thick fur, occasionally discovering areas that made her squirm under my light touch. One of the most surprising was the nerve at the base of her neck that caused her to arch her head back, exposing her neck. That single act led to both of us gasping in exhaustion. She lay curled around my sweating, naked frame. The night hadn't been planned but had evolved into an eventuality. The mood shattered by the violent shudder of the ship, followed by the wail of klaxons and red lights. "What the hell?" I spat as we scrambled to untangle ourselves. "They found us," hissed Shazy as she fled the room toward the bridge. I seized the precious few minutes to pull on my pants and boots as the ship shook repeatedly like a gong. I sprinted onto the bridge while still pulling on my fatigue top. The impact sent me pinballing against the walls as I half stumbled and half ran. On the view screen, we watched as soldiers unleashed rockets and bombs at us from aerial threats. "We need to get airborne," snapped Shazy as her claws flew over the pilot's console. The telltale whine of engines powering up began to fill the deck plates that shifted slightly underfoot. I slipped into the weapons station a second before the ship lurched violently. "Targeting aircraft," I shouted over the sparking of the electrical system. "3 helicopters and half a dozen jets," I announced. I targeted one of the jets and fired. "Damn it," I cursed. "Targeting is off." "Hold on," warned Shazy. The ship tilted back 45 degrees before the force of the thrusters slammed me back into my chair. "I am going to try to outrun them." The ship banked wildly from side to side and even plummeted several thousand feet before climbing again. I continued to fire at the pursuing ships while simultaneously deploying countermeasures. I managed to land a disabling shot against one of the multiple Raptors swarming unpredictably around us. "This would be so much easier if the guidance computers worked," I growled to no one in particular. The ship lurched and rolled out of control. "We lost primary power," Shazy yelled. "Hold on!" She managed to bring us down in a not-so-soft landing that sent us crashing through the trees and across the ground. I shook my head and unbuckled from my chair before sprinting over to Shazy's stunned side. The impact had sent her sprawling across the bridge to land in a heap below the viewport. "Are you okay?" I shouted as I checked her. She shook her head to reorient herself. "Yes," she hissed in frustration. "Cover the corridor while I grab my armor." I nodded and bumped my forehead against hers before darting to the weapon locker to retrieve my rifle. I could hear the screeching of metal from somewhere within the ship. Soldiers began to force their way in through the wreckage. It would only be a matter of time before they made their way up the decks. Smoke choked the halls, illuminated by the persistent sparking of electricity. Each spit of fire forced me to flinch away, lest I be bitten by the onslaught. The first sign emerged from the screeching of the lift doors being forced open. I didn't wait to see who was coming through. I took aim and fired. A brief pause hung in the opening before I heard the clanging of something metal bouncing down the hall toward me. I heard it like a sharp, echoing bang approaching. I blessed my enhanced hearing as I dove back onto the bridge, just in time to avoid hot shards of metal zipping by with a sizzling hiss. The relief was short-lived, however. The blast left my ears ringing uselessly and my head swimming. Shazy stepped over me just as the first rifle came into view. Before the soldier could react, she sank a clawed hand into his throat and shoved him back ahead of her. A short volley of shots rained down toward her, but were absorbed by the dead soldier's armor. It was just enough of an opening for me to semi-regain my senses enough to follow behind her. I managed to pick off 2 more soldiers before they could retreat back the way they had come. The fighting inside the hall stalled. Neither we nor the soldiers could gain any ground in the narrow passage. The ship vibrated around us as I was changing out for my last magazine. It was the first sign something had shifted. The lack of advancement by the soldiers also became apparent when I met no gunfire as I peered into the corridor. I began to advance, but Shazy sank her claws into my shoulder in warning. "Follow behind," she cautioned. We moved carefully down the corridor to the lift without resistance. We both listened as the gunshots yielded to the growl and hiss of Krathen approaching. Shazy let out the first yowl that reverberated throughout the darkened, hallowed halls. A roar echoed back at us. There was no warning as Shazy dropped through the hole in the floor where the lift had been. Without any instruction, I dropped down behind her, landing heavily. I had no sooner regained my footing than I heard the hum of energy weapons. Had Shazy not been blocking the way, I was certain I would have died. "Behind you," warned the figure stepping forward in silver armor that glowed electric blue in areas. Shazy held up her gauntlet-covered arm. "Mine," she stated simply. The armored figure towered over Shazy easily, which is to say I had to look up to see into the visor. The Krathen reached up and toggled the release on the helmet with a rush of air. What it revealed was a broad-faced, black-and-white male with hard golden eyes that bored into my soul. I met his stare unblinkingly for what seemed an eternity before he nodded and turned. "Come," he ordered. We were escorted out of our ship into the now open crash site where we had been brought down. There was a long trench several feet deep and several hundred yards leading up to where our ship rested against a pile of broken trees and rocks. Many of the trees were stripped bare or scorched from the resulting bombardment for as far as the eye could see, which wasn't very far considering the hovering ships or the one landed nearby. The one we were being led to dwarfed our own by easily 4 times. The lines on the ship were sleek and dark enough to absorb the surrounding light like a void. The one thing I tried to avoid looking at were the dead soldiers littering the site. Many were burned unrecognizable, but some lay with what looked like energy weapon burn holes shattering their plate carriers. I noticed a couple massively armored Krathen being carried off the field in the direction of the awaiting ship. One appeared to have been hit by something massive, maybe an AT-4 or something of the like. The center plate looked to be caved in and scorched. The area around where they lifted the body was cratered from what looked to be a blast site. My heart sank at the sight of it all, and a part of me couldn't help but feel responsible for the death on both sides. Once we were inside, 2 Krathen soldiers ushered me away down a side corridor, while Shazy followed the lead that took her farther into the interior of the ship. I wanted to protest but thought better of it when I saw her ear twitch wordlessly. I was guided along in silence. They weren't abusive in their treatment, but their subtle nudges left no room for protest. They finally brought me to a plain room, not unlike the one I slept in before. Shazy dared not glance back at Mitchell as she was led through the corridor. All she could hope for was that he would have noticed her warning twitch and would remain quiet. The officer didn't speak. He didn't have to. She knew where he was taking her. The captain swiveled in his seat the moment they stepped onto the bridge. "I'm pleased to see you alive, Shazy," he remarked. He stood in his loose-fitting flight suit and gestured for her to follow to an adjacent room. "That will be all, Stalker Latra," he said dismissively to her escort. Shazy stood at the end of the table, designed to accommodate 5 Krathen and the captain. He motioned for her to sit and took his own. "Why do you claim the human?" He began without preamble once she was seated. Shazy's ears lowered slightly before straightening. "He rescued me from humans," she responded. "He has been loyal to me." "And the mark?" he persisted, indicating her band. Her ears flattened in embarrassment. "I see," he said. "We will honor your bond." He leaned forward with his claws flat on the table. "Be warned, Shazy." His expression darkened. "The council and your sire will perceive things differently." "Neither the council nor my sire dictate fleet policy," retorted Shazy. "He is different from other humans. Our microcomputers have altered him in unexpected ways." Shazy recounted the escape in the events as they unfolded until now. She described the changes their medical technology had caused. "Our scientists will want to study him once we return to station," cautioned the captain. Shazy's ears swiveled sideways and back in defense. He chose to ignore her distress. "You will both be given rooms per your rank and bond. He is your responsibility until we return." He leaned back. "Do you have any questions, C?" Shazy stood and bowed, her head tilting slightly to expose her neck. "No, Shri." There was nothing to do but rest while I waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes lengthened to hours as I waited anxiously. I wasn't sure when it happened, but I found myself tracing the intricate design on my bond clasp. There was no expected seam where it had sealed around my arm. I didn't want to remove it, but it seemed odd. I examined it more closely. Really examined it. The design was quite mesmerizing. So much so that the world dissolved around me and I was again reliving every moment spent with Shacy. The first moment I became captivated by her eyes, the way her silky fur glided against my bare skin. I was so engrossed in the memories that I never heard my guards enter the room. One minute I was entangled against her, the next I was fending off the clawed hands of the two guards. It took several minutes before my mind finally registered where I was, and I stopped fighting. I tried to lift my arms in surrender, but they were already being wrenched behind me as I was subdued. I watched the guard in front of me give the other a questioning glance before the other eased their grip. "We are to take you to the doctor," stated the one in front of me. "Do not resist us." I nodded once and allowed them to lead me through the bowels of the ship. The halls were dimly lit, but it didn't matter. I could still discern what appeared to be featureless walls, but were covered in occasional glowing panels of swirling symbols that my mind instantly translated into corridor markings. I was somewhere on subsection 6, third floor. Anxiety shifted to curiosity as we continued. We passed a bulkhead seal that read engineering, and then another that stated security station 3-6. A dozen intersections and 2 lifts later, and I was thoroughly lost. Dark halls yielded to lighter colored tans and then mint greens. We approached a double door that slid apart with a hiss at the end. It took a brief moment for my eyes to adjust to what began as a blinding light of a white, sterile room filled with Krathen dressed in moss-colored uniforms. In the center stood Shacy, her tail twitching in agitation, but her face otherwise unreadable. Next to her stood another female in forest green robes. "Why is he restrained?" Shacy growled. "Forgive us, Shacy." The one behind me released the restraints. "He became combative." I raised an eyebrow at the reverence given her but did not question it. "I was asleep," I offered. "I was disoriented when they woke me. It wasn't their fault I had attacked them. I wasn't even sure that it was mine." Shacy's ears lifted slightly and her tail stilled. The female beside her stepped forward, her expression bordering on neutral, but curiosity burned in her eyes. "I am Dr. Shrifa. I have been tasked with evaluating you." I looked from Shrifa to Shacy and back again after she nodded cautiously. "Greetings, Dr. Shrifa." The doctor seemed a bit surprised at my response. I had attempted to speak in Krathen, though my pronunciation definitely needed more work. I thought I caught the slightest hint of amusement on Shacy's face before it was quickly hidden again. Only Shacy's presence steadied me. I was terrified in reality. Shrifa motioned toward an exam chair. "Sit." To my surprise, I wasn't restrained as I expected. Shacy pulled up a stool and sat beside me. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, but I fought the urge. Another dressed in a pastel green robe took the arm opposite and pressed a cylinder against my forearm. The resulting sting caused me to jerk unintentionally. "We need blood," explained Shrifa. Medical staff continued to poke and prod me for the better part of the day. By the time Shrifa had called an end to today's exam, I had been poked, prodded, had pictures taken of my entire body, the last of which left me sitting completely exposed to my dismay. There apparently was no concept of modesty, but seeing as their species was covered in fur, I could almost understand why. It was only my cultural difference that made the situation uncomfortable for me. I swore on several occasions that many of the staff glanced at me with more curiosity than medical professionalism. I dressed back into my fatigues, acutely aware of the acrid smell of smoke that caused me to sneeze violently. Curiously, there were no guards when we left the medical bay. The instant we turned a corner, Shazy brushed her hand against my arm in reassurance. The touch sent shivers reflexively racing across my skin. "How are you faring?" she asked casually enough. "Embarrassed and terrified, honestly," I mumbled. "We are to meet with Mashri," she continued. "I need a shower," I grumbled. "Indeed," she responded with an edge of humor in her voice. "You can shower in our rooms." I looked over at her questionably. "Our rooms?" We stopped in front of a set of doors with the symbols for honor guest scrolled across them. Shazy entered a brief code, and they slid apart to reveal a modest apartment with 3 rooms. one common and the other with a type of bed resembling a shallow bowl along with a shower room. The fact that they were only a couple of turns away from the medical department wasn't lost on me despite the spacious manner of our accommodations. "So, we get to share these?" I asked. I entered the bedroom to find our belongings set out on the bed, minus my weapons, of course. I contemplated my uniforms but chose maroon-colored pants and a shirt similar to the others I had worn. I absently stripped out of my old uniform and headed for the shower, barely aware of Shacy watching me from the doorway. I showered and hissed as the scalding water struck my skin like a pressure washer with enough power to strip paint. I endured it as much as I could manage for a short time, but long enough to wash away the offending odor. My skin was left red and raw from the experience. Shazy flared at the sight of me when I emerged. "I will fix," she said apologetically. "I'll be fine," I responded as I dressed quickly. "I need to adjust to my new life." My response came out harsher than I had intended. The shower had apparently left more than my skin raw, and I had accidentally taken it out on her. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I didn't mean to lash out at you." The sting of my words was evident throughout her posture. Her ears lay flat and her tail hung straight into the floor. She began to turn away, but I closed the distance between us in two quick strides and reached up to cup her face in both of my hands. "I choose you," I said urgently. "You are mine," I enunciated each word in her language. "I am I whispered finally. Her ears perked up instantly as we searched each other's eyes for any doubt. Shazy let out a soft purr as she placed her forehead against mine. She rubbed her cheek against mine gently before I felt the lightest sting of her sharp fang pierce my right ear. "Mine," she stated simply before we parted reluctantly. I followed Shazy through 5 decks and what seemed like half the ship to a room with a guard waiting outside. He said nothing as he keyed the door, and it opened to reveal a room with 4 others waiting. Shacy stepped through first and gave a submissive head tilt gesture to the yellow and black striped male at the end of the table. He waved a hand gesturing to the 2 remaining seats. "Welcome, Shacy." To me, he said, "Welcome, Mitchell. I am Mashri." His pronunciation of my name emerged a bit like a spit, with a clearing of a hairball. "Greetings, Captain," I responded in improving Krathan. Mushri's ears flicked lightly. "You speak our language," he commented, looking at Shacy. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement. "You have met Dr. Shrifa and Stalker Latra," he continued, gesturing at each in turn. "This is Skirsi, my second, and Miotre, my security chief." The other 2 nodded in turn. None of the faces were particularly hostile, but with the exception of Shrifa's expression of open curiosity, they shared a mix of annoyance and skepticism. Miotre's expression was a mix of suspicion and feigned annoyance. His darker black and white striped fur lay short against the skin. He lacked the longer mane of the others. Skursi looked almost amused. His fur matched the captain's in color, but the pattern was noticeably different. Instead of streaks of black running away from his face, they shifted off to the side. Latra appeared as though he had discovered a mouse in need of capture. His golden eyes stood out from his silver-tipped black fur. Their uniforms were similar in design, but the colors varied, from Latra's black utilitarian clothing to Captain Mashri's pristine white with purple trim. None displayed a noticeable rank or insignia to distinguish their position, as far as human eyes could tell. "You are a curiosity, Mitchell," began the captain. "You are human, and so your presence poses a danger." He let his words sink in. He looked to Shazy and back again. "Yet," he continued, "Shazy claims a mate bond. Do you comprehend the significance?" I felt her tail wrap around my calf in reassurance. "I know that we are paired." "He does not even grasp the meaning," spat Latra. "I know that I will die to protect her," I shot back. "She is mine," I continued with a low hiss. Latra narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. Apparently my response was unexpected. Scurzy chortled and banged his clawed hand on the table twice. "I like this human." "He possesses nerve," he announced. "Quite," growled Latra. "Doctor," prompted the captain. Shrifa nodded and activated the screen of her tablet. "His biology is beginning to normalize," she began. "When Shazy utilized micro-robots to treat his wounds, they began to repair his damaged physiology. His senses have been enhanced to the limits of his human genetics. While he will likely not attain our level, he is beyond his natural development." What does that imply, Doctor? Asked Miotre. His genetics are no longer wholly human or Krathen. He is caught somewhere between. Both myself and Shacy were captivated by every word. The micro-robots allow for him to understand our language and enhance his senses and strength. I believe he could improve on them all with training. Can you reverse the effect? Asked Latra. Shrifa shook her head. We can filter out the robots, but the changes are already affected. The meeting continued as though I wasn't even present until food arrived. It was a bit unsettling to be discussed as though I was a child at the adults' table without any desired input. I listened while Shacy answered questions about her team and her ultimate capture with attentive curiosity. Her capture had come at great sacrifice, not just for her team struggling to protect her, but his people too, in an effort to capture them alive. They paused as plates of what appeared to be raw bites of meat were served with what resembled grapes. The taste was surprisingly spicy despite its plain appearance. Each bite made my mouth water in anticipation of the next. There were no utensils available as everyone picked the pieces carefully from the dishes. The fruit was sweet with a slight bite like a grape, but with tougher skin. How is the food? Asked Shrifa suddenly. Tender, I remarked, absently glancing up at the eyes of everyone staring back at me. I stopped mid-chew in bewilderment. I wondered if your altered teeth could manage it, she remarked with a Krathen version of a smile. I resumed chewing slowly as they watched. Even Shacy eyed me with obvious curiosity. I swallowed slowly and took a sip of water from a metal bowl to conceal my distress. I changed the subject. So what happens to us? Mashri lifted a brow. That is a good question. He glanced around the room before continuing. Until we return to our remote station in 2 of your seasons, you will be expected to study our ways. Latra started to protest, but Mashri raised a hand. Your actions reflect Shacy's, and thus you are expected to act accordingly. You will have access to non-essential areas of the ship for now. He glanced at the security chief. Miotre and Shacy will oversee your training. We returned to our room after the meeting. The instant the doors closed behind us, I dashed for the mirror in the bathroom to examine my teeth. I bared my teeth in the mirror and marveled at the small yet sharp fangs where my once dull canines had been. I ran my finger around the inside of my mouth, feeling each tooth. Most felt the same with the exception of the canine and the one behind it which scratched at the skin of my finger. I turned to Shacy. How long have they been like this? I asked urgently. She shrugged. I always believed they were like that. I like them. I returned to my self-exam. My jaw seemed a bit more protracted to accommodate the dental changes. I lifted my hands and noticed my fingernails seemed a bit longer than usual. What I thought had been lack of nail care turned out to be something altogether different. The nails were longer but a bit sharper than usual. Chapter 6. Prophecy. A sharp beep from the door jolted me awake way too early. I rolled over, reaching out, only to find the bed empty. Panic seized me, and I shot upright. Shazy! Nothing. I scrambled out of bed and dashed to the outer room. It took several minutes to calm down, my heart thumping urgently in my ears as I struggled to regain composure before answering the persistent beeping at the door. I almost opened it before realizing I stood naked in the center of the room. Enter, I called out, ducking back into the bedroom. I grabbed a simple burgundy tunic with gold trim before stepping back out, pulling on the matching shirt. A young female security officer waited in the room. She wasn't much taller than me and wore a digital gray outfit with 2 silver diamonds on her collar, which I assumed denoted rank. She introduced herself as Team Leader Proshro. I have been assigned to you at Shazy's request. I couldn't discern much about her with the uniform on, except for the gray fur with irregular diamond patterns on her head. So, you're the one who got the babysitting gig, eh? She tilted her head in confusion. Babysitter? Someone who cares for young while the adults are away, I explained. Something like that, she quipped back. I am to teach you etiquette and self-defense. Her tail twitched in impatient irritation. What's on the agenda for today? I quizzed. I am to orient you to the ship before taking you to medical for testing. She seemed a bit annoyed by the questions. Is there any chance we can stop for food first? I offered my most charming smile. Her ears flattened, and I realized my mistake. My apologies. Humans flash teeth to appear friendly. I forget it means something different for you. I curved my lips into a closed lip smile. Her ears lifted halfway. Yes, Shazy briefed me on your smile. Do not repeat it, she said tartly. She checked the device on her arm. We have time for food, she said, finally tapping a few keys. I gestured for her to lead the way. I was still perplexed by Shazy's disappearance, but Proshro claiming to have been briefed about me by her eased my nerves. We walked side by side in silence to the dining hall. Not many people were present. Only two others engaged in a lively conversation that ended abruptly when we entered. Their conversation shifted to hushed whispers and occasional glances toward me. Proshro scowled in their direction, and they fell silent, though the sideways glances persisted. What do you recommend, Proshro? I asked. Her jaw clenched visibly before turning to the waiting cook. She requested something I couldn't quite translate, but looked suspiciously like noodles with white pieces of meat. The cook stepped away momentarily and returned with two bowls. She directed me to a table across the room from the other patrons. We sat across from each other in silence. She continued to watch me as I studied the contents of my bowl. It smelled good, whatever it was. I took a cautious bite and hummed. This is good, I remarked and took a larger bite. I looked back up at my companion thoughtfully. So, what did you do before you got stuck with me? I asked. I swore she rolled her eyes. It was the first human-like expression of annoyance I had ever seen. I am security team lead, she said finally. I command a small team of 10 others. I perked up. We call people who command small teams like those sergeants. I'm a sergeant. I paused. Or I was, I trailed off. We ate in silence for the remainder of breakfast. Our next stop was a supply station where I received a wrist tablet in addition to another much larger one. Proshro linked them both to my biosignature. They used simple inputs, both verbal and manual. There were multiple file shortcuts that opened information about culture, hierarchy, both military and civilian, and history. I examined the functionality for a minute before an idea began to form. I can translate your military structure into ours, I said, looking up at the waiting Proshro. I can possibly even translate civilian hierarchy. I think it would help our people to understand each other better. I grew more excited about the prospect. Our next stop was medical. Shrifa looked up from behind her desk, her ears pitching forward in excitement. Welcome, Mitchell. There was that spit and gag sound. There has to be a better way to pronounce my name, I thought. Hello again, doctor. I glanced over at my escort to discover her mysteriously absent. Great. Aloud, I said, what have you got planned for me today? I didn't exactly dislike or distrust the doctor, but she made me uncomfortable. Her exams felt a little too personal. I want to run some additional blood tests to monitor your changes, she explained. After that, I want to run neural scans. She stopped to study me when I didn't follow. Don't worry, they're not invasive. Shortly after having my blood taken, I was hooked up to enough wires that I felt like a computer motherboard. The last time I felt like this was when the military conducted a sleep study on me after my first deployment. I need some baseline information, she prompted. Our initial tests indicated there might have been deficiencies known to your species. Deficiencies? Yes, she responded. Did you use prosthetics? No, I began, but suddenly realized I hadn't needed my glasses since I'd been injured. Not that I would have access to them here. I wore glasses to help see distance. It took me a minute to explain the term glasses before realization struck her. I answered medical questions I wouldn't have thought to volunteer on my own. It wasn't out of intentional deceit. They were minor ailments that I had adapted to over the years. Even those that limited my ability to run any significant distance hadn't occurred to me until now. I hadn't even given it a second thought the day I ran over 20 miles round trip to meet my friend. I had been so focused on the things I needed that I hadn't realized what I had done. I think we have enough information for our baseline, she announced while I let the realization of my changes sink in. Just relax for now. I want to get a resting scan done today. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. The cool fall breeze tickled the hair on my arms and face as I sniffed the air. I marveled at the way it kissed the skin beneath, like the promise of a lover's embrace. The world was my jungle, deep, mysterious, and full of potential as I turned to scan the scenery stretched out around me, full of fireflies that flickered as if stars winking in and out of existence. I began to explore this majestic place just as a bolt of lightning kissed my flank, sending me sprawling across the burnt wasteland that once held me like a mother holds a beloved child. Acrid smoke choked my lungs that threatened to dissolve my being from within. Corrupt, evil, dangerous. "Hold him!" someone shouted. Thousands of sharp barbs pierced my skin with precision accuracy as I struggled to regain my footing. Lightning continued to assault my existence, while I struggled to fight against that which sought to consume all that I was or would become. I yowled in defiance, though I didn't know the words nor how I could be denied. I snapped awake with a jerk. I glanced around jerkily in confusion when my body refused to obey my command against the pressure that threatened to consume. "What the hell?" "Calm down," came the soft voice of a goddess just out of reach. "Where are you?" I pleaded. "I'm here, Mitchell." The voice was a whisper on the breeze that carried the scent of sweet pine. "It's Shazy. Calm down, please." I could feel her soft, silken face against my own, and I calmed slightly. "Shazy?" "Yes, I'm here," she purred. "You are safe." The darkness began to retreat from the encroaching light that illuminated Shazy's face like a halo. Her blue eyes filled my view, like the clearest blue waters sent to quell my fears, to extinguish the fire that filled my lungs. It took me several long minutes to calm my breathing and the thundering of my heart pounding within my head to subside. "What happened?" I glanced around in wide-eyed confusion. Medical staff stood, keeping a safe distance. Only Shazy dared to come close, rhythmically brushing my hair back from my face. "You had a terror dream," she cooed. "You are safe." She reassured me for a minute longer before looking over at Shrifa and nodding. "I think we can release the restraints, doctor." Pershro and another security officer approached cautiously to unwrap the bindings holding me down. Peeling them back felt like quills being pulled free. I moved to sit on the side of the bed as I absently picked hair off my tongue and lips. I blinked 3 times in dismay as I looked down at my blood-covered hand. Did I bite my lip? It didn't feel like I had, but there was no other explanation my mind could comprehend. "You attacked one of the medical technicians," explained Pershro. My eyes widened in disbelief. "I did what?" I glanced around horridly for the injured tech. I finally spotted her across the bay. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to." I began to babble incoherently before I heard the voice of a male I hadn't noticed before. "So, he does possess bite in him." Miotre leaned against the wall near the entrance to the medical bay. "I expect a full report on what transpired, doctor," he said before turning to leave. "Come," urged Shazy. "Let's get you cleaned up." I followed her gentle command without really registering it. I drifted into a state of melancholy during my retrospection on the way back to our rooms. The dream replayed itself over and over in my mind all the way. The sense of everything had already begun to fade, leaving only the raw emotion of how it made me feel. It felt like a warning, a prophecy of things to come that only I could prevent from coming to pass. I dared not speak of it until we were safe in our quarters. I walked over to the mirror in the shower room to study my face. I needed to check to see if there had been any changes. All that I found looking back was a bloodied chin and a mysteriously yellowing bruise. "It was all so real," I commented. I splashed my face with hot water from the basin to wash away the stubborn dried blood. I watched in amazement between splashes of water at the slowly dissipating bruise on the side of my face. How did I get the bruise on my face? Realizing I knew nothing of how it happened. "Proshro had to strike you to release the technician," explained Shazy. I glanced back at her in the mirror, concerned. "Will she be okay?" "A couple of days with her arm in a dermal regenerator, though. It may take a few months for the hair to fully grow back." She almost sounded amused were it not for the undercurrent of concern. "What happened? Dr. Shrifa said you became violent halfway through the neural scan?" "I need a shower," I proclaimed suddenly. I wanted to tell her about the dream, but the words wouldn't emerge. I could feel them building in my mind like a dam ready to burst. I pushed away from the counter and flipped on the shower to warm while I stripped out of my clothes. I wanted to feel the sensation against my skin. I needed to wash away the foul smell that filled my mind. Shacy blessedly didn't press the conversation right then. I was wholly sure I wouldn't be able to fight the emotions building behind the floodgates. The water pressure burned my skin like fire the instant I stepped beneath the downpour. It was enough to make me cry out automatically. I couldn't even move to escape the onslaught if I wanted to. I needed it to wash away the nightmare before it too could consume me. Almost as quickly as it had begun, it abated. I could feel the steam of the crashing water coiling around me as though a viper ready to strike. But, "What is going on?" asked Shacy urgently. I leaned back against her slickening fur with a sigh of defeat. My legs began to lose strength, and we sank to the floor together. I reached up to clasp her sinewed, yet chiseled muscular arms. The feel of her against me was a steadying presence that anchored me into the reality of here and now. I buried my face into her saturated fur arms to fill my mind with her essence. I felt her rest her chin on my shoulder and lean in to press her cheek against mine. "Talk to me," she whispered. "You are scaring me." I lifted a hand back to cup her other cheek in an attempt to pull her closer. "It was paradise," I moaned. The sensation of the forest breeze against my fur was like nothing I could ever imagine. The dam had burst. I was just thankful the water running down my face washed away the tears before she could see them, to see my weakness. The world spread out around me for as far as the eyes could see. From even farther, the breeze brought forth a promise of distant, yet unseen potential marvels. The tears began to flow freely now. I could no longer control the shaking of my shoulders as I sobbed like a child. I described every detail in vivid accuracy, the bliss and tragedy. My voice continued to break, but I no longer cared. I had to share this prophecy with the one who would be most affected by it with me. Shazy listened in silence while I lay my soul bare for her to judge. I didn't know how long we sat there in the shower before I realized we swayed gently side to side. I didn't want the moment to end. It did end, however. "Do you know what Shrin Skask Mashal means?" The calm that had been so encompassing shattered like a million shards of glass expanding outward from a terminal point. "No?" I answered cautiously as though plucking a spider strand, expecting it to strike any moment. "The bond is everything." I turned to look at her, questioning. "Dr. Shrifa said you shouted it in perfect Krathen after Proshro struck you." I felt like a mouse caught by a giant cat. "You spoke it in an ancient dialect not used in nearly 1,000 years." "How?" I asked, bewildered. "We do not know." She looked at me, concerned. "It took our computers a while to even translate it." She paused. "It was a long-forgotten prophecy until now." "But what does it mean?" I asked. Shazy shook her head. "We do not know at the moment. Our communication specialists are trying to find out everything they can, but so far they are coming up empty." The shower took that as its cue to shut off. I glanced up then, laughing in resignation. I guess we used up our daily shower ration. I stood while reaching out to draw her up with me. "I love you," I said without thinking, and froze. We shared a bed and enjoyed the fleeting time we had together every day. But did she actually love in return? I like to imagine she did. I needed her to, but "Our bond is everything," she said then, breaking the intensely brief silence. "You are mine." There had been no delay in her response. Only the stretching of time brought on by fear and bated breath made it feel like an eternity. It took me only a fraction of the time it did for her to dry. For one, I used a towel. Shazy utilized the drying system built into the shower stall. It made a lot of sense considering the amount of fur that needed drying. I stood bare-chested, watching how ruffled her coat became. She gave me a warning glance when she heard the snort I failed to hold back. I loved watching her every move. Each motion was an elegant dance of practiced, lethal efficiency. I imagined that not even the fabled monks of Earth could match her movements if they had a dozen lifetimes to master them. "You can brush it out since you find it so amusing," she growled playfully. "I would cherish every stroke," I countered. "We shall see," she said, flipping off the blowers. What began as a masterclass in Krathen grooming standards devolved into a playful game of wrestling as I deliberately teased areas of her fur to stand and dance with crackles of static energy. I used every opportunity to zap her on the nose or ear with the released energy built up around her. The struggle between us eventually ended, with the two of us entangled against each other, her resting on top. I think I'm going to have a lot of explaining to do when Captain Mashri gets briefed on my actions. I mumbled conversationally. Hmm, was the only response. I think Miotre likes me, I persisted. Shut up, she grumbled. Sleep. We were summoned to the captain's briefing room the next morning as expected. Neither of us knew what to expect when we stopped outside to await being summoned inside. We could both hear muffled spits and hisses emanating through the door, along with the occasional shouts of a heated berating. Most of the interchange was one-sided, the captain exacting his pound of flesh from whomever had been summoned before us. By the flattened ears and pained expression on the security officer's face blocking the door, it didn't bode well for what we were about to experience for ourselves. Do you think he'll season us up before he tears into us next? I whispered. It was enough that both Shacy and the guard's ears twitched in barely suppressed amusement. The door slid open before I could formulate additional snide quips in my nervous attempt to lighten the mood. Enter! Roared Captain Mushry. We hurried in. Shazy's tail hung stiff and her ears managed to vanish within the slightly frizzled mane. I entered half astride behind her. I wondered errantly if my tail would have been tucked partially between my legs had I one to hide. Shrifa, Skursi, Miotre, and Preshro attended the meeting. Each set of eyes followed us warily into the room. Sit! I want to, I began. You will get your chance, snapped Captain Mashri. He took a breath before continuing in a deceptively calm, measured voice. Dr. Shrifa tells me that you are not at fault, Mitchell. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped when Skursi shook his head. I closed it with a resounding snap. She claims you had a terror dream brought on from trauma. He turned to the doctor. Tell us what your scans discovered. Shrifa explained everything that had proceeded as expected until the scans detected a sharp spike in brain activity. He didn't become feral until apprentice technician Kranz attempted to adjust one of the leads that had come loose. He violently bit into her arm the instant she touched him. She stole a brief glance at me and then back. Proshro tried to pry his jaws off, but he bit down harder and tore a chunk from her arm and swallowed before we could stop him. It was then that I hit him, interjected Proshro. Correct, continued Shrifa. The most interesting part is that his brain scans ceased when he shouted, Shrin Skask Mishau. Captain Mashri held up a clawed hand. Are you sure? He asked. None of us alive knew the meaning of the words. Even the translator struggled to translate the words. We are certain, Mashri. Miotre took up the narrative. I personally reviewed the video myself several times. I think it is an old prophecy, but we cannot be sure of its meaning until we are able to consult with the wise ones. I also believe whatever its meaning, it involves them both. What makes you think that? I blurted. Miotre's eyes shifted to me and then to Shazy. Because only she could calm you in your delirious state. Nothing anyone else did worked, but the instant she touched you, you calmed. You mostly stilled when she spoke to you. Can you tell us about your dream? Asked the captain. I shook my head and lied. No, sir. He eyed me suspiciously but moved on. I would like to study their connection more closely, stated Shrifa. Shacy growled noticeably, her fangs barely beginning to show. Shrifa held up her hands defensively. We need to understand your bond. We risk harming both of you if we do not, Mitchell more so. Shazy blinked as though she suddenly awoke from a trance. All trace of hostility vanished from her expression, replaced with concern. What would you require? She asked warily. I would like both of you to wear biomonitors while you go about your day for the next week. She looked to the captain for support. It would be his final decision on the matter, as the one ultimately responsible for everyone on the ship. Mashri mulled it over thoughtfully. Very well. You can carry out your non-invasive tests. I want detailed daily reports, Doctor. He turned to Shacy and me. Proshro mentioned you think you can compile a comparative military and cultural comparison between our species? Finally, a question I could answer. My mind leapt at the possibility. I think I can, sir. It would, in my opinion, minimize the type of hostilities our two people encountered before. How so? He prodded. I chose my words carefully this time. Earth militaries operate with veiled autonomy within their respective governments. Government officials focus largely on manipulating the opinion of the common person in order to get re-elected. I stopped to make sure everyone was following. The military interprets every unknown as a threat until proven otherwise, be it from space or each other. I assume your military does the same? Mashri nodded. You must understand what motivates human governments. You must publicly project the idea of peace that the common person can latch onto. To do that, you need a go-between. You need people who understand the motivations of both species. Interesting, Mashri remarked. I will discuss this with my government. In the interim, I want you and Shacy to form a team to work on this. He glanced over to Miotre. I want you to oversee this project. He looked back to us. You will report your findings and progress to Miotre. Yes, Captain, Shazy and I said in unison. Mashri stood and we all followed suit. Dismissed. Stay tuned for more chapters to come.